अचिरेणाधिगच्छति श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम् तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम् अचिरेणाधिगच्छति श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम् तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम् अचिरेणाधिगच्छति श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम् तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम् अचिरेणाधिगच्छति श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम् तत्परः समेतेन्द्रियः ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम् अचिरेणाधिगच्छति श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम् तत्परः समेतेन्द्रियः ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम् अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः
तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम्
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम्
अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
तत्परः समतेन्द्रियः
संयतेन्द्रियः
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परं शान्तिम्
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम्
अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
तत्परः समतेन्द्रियः
तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परं शान्तिम्
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम्
अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः
तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम्
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम्
अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम्
तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियाः
तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परं शान्तिम्
ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम्
अचिरेन्द्रियाधिगच्छति
अधिगच्छति श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम् तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम् अचिरेणाधिगच्छति श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानम् तत्परः संयतेन्द्रियः ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम् अचिरेणाधिगच्छति
हरे कृष्ण।
Shraddhavan, a faithful man, a faithful man. Labhate, achieves. Jnanam, knowledge. Tatparaha, very much attached to it. Samyata, controlled. Indriyaha, senses. Jnanam, knowledge. Labdhva, have achieved. Having achieved. Param, transcendental. Shantim, peace. Achirena, very soon. Adhigachati, attains. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Translation. A faithful man who is absorbed in transcendental knowledge and who subdues his senses quickly attains the supreme spiritual peace. Translation with repetition. A faithful man who is absorbed in transcendental knowledge and who subdues his senses quickly attains the supreme spiritual peace. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Such knowledge in Krishna consciousness can be achieved by a faithful person who believes firmly in Krishna. One is called a faithful man who thinks that simply by acting in Krishna consciousness, he can attain the highest perfection. This faith is attained by the discharge of devotional service and by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, which cleanses one's heart of all material dirt. Over and above this, one should control the senses. A person who is faithful to Krishna and who controls the senses can easily attain perfection in the knowledge of Krishna consciousness without delay. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnanathmirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyata Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So today's discussion is about finding spiritual peace in a conflicting world. So Lord Krishna is instructing Arjuna about the way to find ultimate supreme peace. I believe no one would disagree that everyone is looking for peace. There is no one who doesn't want peace. Now, in spite of everyone desiring peace, not everyone has peace. Now, one may ask this question, why is that one is not having peace? And what does that mean that one does not have peace? And eventually, how can one attain to peace, real peace? So this is a wonderful instruction in that direction as how one can attain peace. So let us relook into this verse again to see what is being said here. So it is being said, Shraddhava labhate jnanam. So it says, one who is faithful can attain to this knowledge. What knowledge? The transcendental knowledge. Tatparaha samyatendriyaha. So tatparaha, Prabhupada translates as very much attached to it. So a faithful man who is very much attached to the transcendental knowledge, samyatendriyaha, one who is controlling his senses, jnanam labdhva param shantim. So it is being said here that a person Shraddhaval, a person who is faithful. Now, a person who is faithful can obtain transcendental knowledge, first point. And a person who is absorbed in transcendental knowledge and who controls his senses obtains very quickly the ultimate supreme peace. So this is the meaning of this verse, which is very simple, but it's a quite profound formula for people to become peaceful in the world. A faithful man who is absorbed in transcendental knowledge and who subdues his senses quickly attains the supreme spiritual peace. So let us look at this first point as what constitutes a faithful man. How does one understand what is faith and who is actually faithful? And also let us look into what is the absorption in transcendental knowledge, or why one must focus one's attention on transcendental knowledge. And third, we will look slightly into the importance of subduing senses. And the result of all this is that one attains supreme spiritual peace. Maybe let us begin from understanding what is supreme peace. So the word peace refers to disturbance. So it is opposite to disturbance. The word peace is opposite to the word disturbance. So in this world, no one likes to be disturbed. Immediately someone disturbs us, we become very, very agitated. We become uncomfortable. Similarly, it need not be always an external person to disturb us. It could be our own mind, it could be our own senses, or it could be our own desires which could disturb us. So disturbance is present everywhere around. Either one reason or the other reason, there is disturbance. Wherever there is disturbance, there is no peace. So a person cannot find peace where there is disturbance. This is the natural scenario where an individual is feeling disturbance and therefore not peace. And then there is social disturbance. There is governments not having hospitals, not having sufficient food. There is no education, and therefore there is some disturbance, or people fighting against each other. There is a disturbance. And on top of that, Prabhupada says there can be countries fighting against each other. Just like we see today, there are many countries who are fighting against each other. And therefore there is disturbance. There is no peace. Srila Prabhupada writes in Srimad Bhagavatam, in the very preface and introduction, in the preface, that in spite of various advancement in modern civilization, the modern civilization is not able to find or bring together people or humanity in peace. It's not able to bring together people to be peaceful. Why is that, and how does it solve? Srila Prabhupada mentions that Srimad Bhagavatam is the cultural representation of re-spiritualization of the society. That means by this presentation of Srimad Bhagavatam, the entire world can find peace. Similarly here, Lord Krishna is giving a few more instructions about how one can find peace. If there is disturbance all around, now we need to understand what is this disturbance, why is it coming? What is the root of it? And the solution that is given here, how is that is applicable for us? So let us try to pay a little more attention to see how one can attain that supreme spiritual peace. So before we understand the supreme spiritual peace as how we can attain it, let's try to first focus on what does the word faithful man mean? Or even more specifically, what does the word faith mean? So if often people are said that faith means you are not rational and therefore you're trying to take to faith. That means people think faith is something not very great. Oh, I'm accepting this by faith. So therefore people laugh, oh, you're not very scientific. You're not very rational. You're not very progressive. You do not know. You do not know the real meaning of life, and therefore you're blinded because of lack of evidence and knowledge. You are accepting things by emotion or by faith. So people here think that faith is only limited to religion or some sort of spirituality. But Srila Prabhupada explains very nicely by giving an example as how faith is present everywhere. So here Srila Prabhupada is showing an example of a barber. Prabhupada says everyone, men go to barber usually, and when we sit in front of the barber brings a blade. And when he's bringing a blade, we sit in front of him. Now with that blade, he can cut our throat. And when he has this weapon. If he cuts our throat, we die. But we have a faith that if I go to the barber, he's only going to shave me, cut my hair only. And therefore, it's fine for me to sit in front of him, even though he's carrying a small weapon. Therefore, Prabhupada says, faith is something that is present in all field of activities. Even if we want to take one step from one place to another place, we have to have faith that the next place where I'm going, there is not a bomb which is present. The next step I'm putting, there is no bomb there. The next step where I'm going to put, a tree will not fall down. So basically, in every action that we do, we need some faith. And therefore, faith is not something that is limited to spirituality, religion. Faith is present across the disciplines. Faith is present in every sphere of our life. And therefore, the question may come, so are you suggesting that if faith is present everywhere, shouldn't there be faith in spiritual life? Of course, definitely. There has to be faith in spiritual life. Just like there is also a lot of faith that we put in science. So similarly, we also need to understand what is faith in spiritual life. So one common argument that is made by people is that in religious life or spiritual life means it is blind faith. Prabhupada says no. Faith is required, but it is not blind faith. So here you can see someone is asking him to step, but there is nothing but a valley. Similarly, on the other hand, you can see a leader who's leading people to only fall off a cliff. So we are not talking about blind faith. There is a difference between blind faith, and extreme opposite to blind faith is questioning without submission. So some people say, why should I accept what you are saying? Why should I accept what Bhagavad Gita is saying? I will question. So simply questioning without qualification, simply questioning without submission is also not helpful for one to find the real answers. Therefore, Prabhupada says, we do not recommend either blind following or blind faith, nor we recommend questioning without submission or questioning to understand. One can question, but the intent should be to understand. Simply questioning is not sufficient. And therefore, the second important point is that when we talk about faith, it is not blind faith. Then the question comes, what is right faith? So right faith means when we acquire knowledge, we acquire from different sources. Now, according to Bhagavad Gita, as we saw in the 4th chapter, how do we acquire transcendental knowledge? The transcendental knowledge is acquired by approaching a bona fide spiritual master. So how do we develop right faith? The way to develop right faith is first to identify a bona fide spiritual master. This is a very important point because until unless we do not have the right source, we cannot get the right knowledge. So just like if I can put a faith in the barber because he is in some sense Harish Prabhu, you can have the questions later. So to identify the bona fide spiritual master and to receive knowledge from him is very, very important. Now, as soon as we identify a bona fide spiritual master, it is important to surrender unto him. After surrendering unto him, one must render service and ask questions in a mood to understand. This is called right faith. Right faith means you acquire knowledge from a bona fide source. And this is recommended in Bhagavad Gita. But it is also important we saw what are the qualities of a bona fide spiritual master. Bona fide spiritual master is fully self-realized, who has deliberated completely on the transcendental message of the scriptures, and who has realized it, and who can present it with conviction and clarity to others. So if we obtain knowledge by having faith, and it is again here, Prabhupada mentions it's not blind faith. The questioning is allowed, but in the mood to understand. When that is done, one is said to have the right faith. Now, Shastras also define what is faith. So in one place, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is described, so this is the common traditional definition that is provided for faith in Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. And the definition is, Shraddha Shabde Vishwasa Kahe Sudrida Nishchaya. So it says Shraddha Shabde. The word Shraddha means Vishwasa Kahe. It says that Vishwasa, from faith, Srudhuda, from Nishchaya, conviction. So to have unflinching trust in something sublime. So what does the word faith means? So faith means to trust someone or to trust something completely. So just like a child trusts father or mother and depends upon them that, okay, when I am in the house, I don't have to worry about anyone. So there is an unflinching trust in something. And Prabhupada here interestingly writes this word called sublime. Actually, according to the philosophy, in Latin philosophy, the word sublime also means something which is very great and something which cannot be understood by any kind of measurement, by any kind of imitation, something that is very, very great, something very sublime, very extraordinary, outstanding. So even to understand some common things, we need to have faith, to go to school, learn from them. We need to register in a course and get the knowledge. But shouldn't we have faith in obtaining something very, very outstanding? Yes, we should have faith, but we should have the faith in the right place. And the faith must have a certain characteristics. And the faith, the preliminary faith in Krishna consciousness that is to be developed is said to be Krishna Bhakti Kaile Sarva Karma Krita Hoya. What does this mean? That means if one renders service in Krishna consciousness, that means he has performed all other activities, or he is simply by performing activities in Krishna consciousness, one can attain complete perfection. So this faith that becoming Krishna consciousness is the most important activity of life. This simple fact, and simply knowing this in truth, in Tattvataha, and engaging in Krishna service, this constitutes true faith, means unflinching trust that if I simply follow the instructions of Krishna, then everything is perfect. Sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam vraja. So if I simply perform my activities, surrendering unto Krishna, then all perfection is there. Srila Prabhupada also explains faith means to take to the instructions of the Supreme Lord completely. To take to the instructions of Bhagavad Gita completely. So people, they take one portion of Bhagavad Gita and discard another portion of Bhagavad Gita. That is now called as faith. Faith means to accept completely. Similarly, in other place, Prabhupada also describes faith means to follow the instructions of the spiritual master. Brahmaji, when he came out from the lotus stem of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, he was all alone. And he hears some sound from the sky, and he takes that as the instruction, and he starts following tapasya for 1,000 years. And Prabhupada says that this transcendental vibration, which was heard by Brahmaji, is much more important than having someone physically present. And so sometimes we think Krishna should come physically, only then I will accept Bhagavad Gita. No, Prabhupada says the transcendental vibration is as good as the individual or the Supreme Lord being present there, or the spiritual master being present there. So if one sincerely executes the instructions given by the spiritual master, in case of Brahmaji, it was a Supreme Lord himself, but in our case, we are fortunate to have Srila Prabhupada. And if we follow the instructions of the spiritual master with faith, that is following the instructions of the spiritual master is also called faith. So having that faith, by doing this, I will attain the perfection of life. By following these instructions is called faith. Now, there is also another definition of faith that Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport, which is similar to the previous purport that we discussed. One is called a faithful man who thinks that simply by acting in Krishna consciousness, he can attain the highest perfection. So we are all endeavoring for various kinds of activities, various kinds of goals that we have. And we think by attaining those things, I'll get true perfection, true happiness. So this is not complete faith. And Srila Prabhupada explains this little more further in another place, where Srila Prabhupada says, faith can be of different kinds. And based upon faith, people perform different activities. And interestingly, Srila Prabhupada defines different kinds of faith based upon karma, jnana, yoga, and bhakti. Prabhupada says one who is driven by that there is benefit in fruitive activities. That kind of faith is said to be faith based on karma. Someone who has got faith that by obtaining knowledge that I am Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit soul, and find liberation in impersonal Brahman, he is said to have a kind of faith based on the jnana. Similarly, one who thinks that the goal of life is to obtain some mystic powers, that kind of faith is based upon the yoga philosophy. And finally, Prabhupada says that the bhakti, the faith in bhakti means rendering service to Krishna is the perfection of life. So by different activities one is performing, one's faith can be understood. Similarly, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita also gives another classification of faith, faith which is of Kanishta, Madhyama, and Uttama. So one's faith, which is very, very beginning, very, very fragile, that is considered to be Kanishta Adhikari. Whereas a Madhyama Adhikari, whose faith is stabilized, but he cannot support his arguments from scriptures. But a Uttama Adhikari has firm Dhrudha Nishchaya. He is completely convinced of the fact that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and me engaging in his service is the ultimate perfection of life. Now, this is said to be the highest perfection, and a Uttama Adhikari has fully can describe his faith by referring to Shastras. He can completely understand, quote, and explain it to anyone the underlying truths present in the Shastras. So in this way, there are different degrees of faith. So it is very important for each one of us to develop strong faith in the instructions of the spiritual master, strong faith in the instructions of Lord Krishna, strong faith that performing devotional service is the highest perfection. By developing this kind of faith, we obtain easily obtain transcendental knowledge. So, Shraddhaval labate jnanam. Labate achieves. If one becomes faithful to Krishna, if one develops faith in Krishna and follows his instructions, one can easily obtain transcendental knowledge. So that is a very important principle, that how it is easy to obtain transcendental knowledge simply by having faith. Now, what is this transcendental knowledge is all about? So transcendental knowledge, the entire fourth chapter describes about transcendental knowledge. So beginning from the position of Krishna in the beginning of the fourth chapter, the entire text is talking about transcendental knowledge. And one important aspect of understanding transcendental knowledge is to understand the constitutional position of the living entity. To understand that I'm spirit soul, I'm not this material body, is the first principle of transcendental knowledge. To understand beyond senses what I can comprehend, there is this fundamental ontological truth that I'm not material body, but I'm a spirit soul. Then it is also equally important to understand the position of the Lord. Who is Supreme Lord? What is my relationship with the Supreme Lord? And what is this Prakriti? What is this nature? What is my duty in this material world? What is the position of the Lord? What is my spiritual duty? And finally, what are the activities to be performed on spiritual plane? So having this knowledge, how does one acquire this knowledge? It is very difficult in the material world for someone to understand who am I. Forget understanding who is Supreme Lord. And furthermore, even if people understand, just like in Bhagavad Gita, just like one can see, there are millions of karmis, among them there is one Jnani. After so much of endeavoring, so much for material enjoyment, fruitive work, one may recognize that I'm not satisfied in spite of earning so much material gain. And therefore he thinks, let me renounce this material gain and focus on Aham Brahmasmi. Let me focus that I'm spirit soul. Among such millions of thousands of Jnanis, there is one yogi who tries to understand the Supreme who is present within the heart. And among so many of them, one becomes a bhakta, a devotee of the Supreme Lord. And among them, one understands perfectly well who the Supreme Personality of Godhead is. And one who understands performs the perfect spiritual activities. Therefore, it is such a rarity to actually understand what constitutes spiritual activities. What does it mean to perform activities on spiritual plane? But by the mercy of a pure devotee, this knowledge becomes easily revealed. And therefore, this transcendental knowledge is, although available in Bhagavad Gita and other places, because one does not have faith, he cannot absorb this knowledge, he cannot appreciate this knowledge. Similarly, it is also important to understand there is another meaning to the word transcendental knowledge, which is mentioned in other places, especially Bhagavad Gita 5.29 and Ishopanishad. And this says that Lord is a supreme enjoyer, proprietor, and dearmost friend. So Srila Prabhupada, in one of his lectures, he states that this is also transcendental knowledge, to understand the nature of the Supreme Lord. The nature of the Lord is that he is the supreme enjoyer. So all the sacrifices of all the results, he is supposed to be the enjoyer. And he is the owner and proprietor of everything in existence. And he is the dearmost friend. So when one's consciousness is absorbed in this knowledge, so as we saw so we saw this verse where it says, Shraddhava labate jnanam tatparaha. So tatparaha, the word tatparaha refers to absorption. So when one is absorbed in this transcendental knowledge, that the Supreme Lord is the enjoyer, proprietor, and dearmost friend, one can find ultimate peace. Now one may question, how is that if one understands the position of the Lord as the enjoyer, proprietor and dearmost friend, how can there be peace? Now, let us take few examples for each of this case. Now, let us take this example of being a proprietor. Proprietor means everyone thinks I am the owner, I am the enjoyer, I am the proprietor, I own something. So you can see, even though there is United Nations, there are so many countries which are fighting against each other. Even the states within a country are fighting against each other, trying to grab that this is my land. Similarly, individuals are fighting amongst each other, saying, this is my property, that is your property. So each one is artificially trying to become a proprietor. That means they are trying to grab something which is not theirs. As soon as one is trying to infringe upon others' propriety or property, then there is a disturbance. As soon as one comes into this consciousness that I am the proprietor, then there is a certain sense of infringement in the laws of material nature. As soon as there's infringement to what is given to you by the Lord, there is disturbance within the individual and in the society. Similarly, everyone in this material world is trying to enjoy independently. And therefore, there is disturbance between two people, two nations, and so on and so forth. So this independent enjoyment, the aspect that I should independently take the way I want, is another cause of disturbance. And thirdly, to falsely assume either oneself or someone else to be the dearmost friend is also a disturbance, because one assumes someone to be true friend, but then one can find that eventually the relationship ends up in different kinds of disturbances. And therefore, one again loses peace. In other words, to remain free from disturbance, one must be situated in transcendental knowledge. That means only when one is aware that, a nice example to illustrate this point is that imagine a person is in a country and he commits a crime. As soon as he commits a crime, the police department comes and disturbs him and puts him in jail. So now this factor of the act of the criminal performed is the cause for his being disturbed. Similarly, there are certain laws, just like there are state laws, when they are infringed, a person will be disturbed by certain police, certain courts, and put him under certain conditions. Similarly, there are certain laws of nature. There is dharma, the laws given by the Supreme. When a living entity follows these laws given by the Supreme, he will not be disturbed by illusion, by Maya. He will not be influenced by three modes of material nature. And thereby, he can remain undisturbed. He can remain peaceful. If one is not free from illusion, then he is bound to commit activities which are going to lead him to reactionary chain of struggle. And therefore, this absorption in transcendental knowledge, to know this fundamental truths about transcendental knowledge of the position of oneself, the position of the Supreme Lord, the activities on spiritual platform can keep one peaceful in all circumstances. And the third point that was mentioned is that one should also control one's senses. Now, there is a wonderful example of a great saint called Bilvamangal Thakur. Bilvamangal Thakur, he was so much enamored by a prostitute that he used to go always to her place and find enjoyment. One day, his father died, and he was in such a hurry that he told the priest, "Finish the Shraddha ceremony faster. I want to go. I have something else to do." So he rushes the priest to get his things done. And this Bilvamangal Thakur, in heavy rain, he somewhere or the other crosses the river, and the prostitute, she thinks that today it's raining and it is his father's ceremony, death ceremony, so he may not come. But having closed all the doors, Bilvamangal Thakur still manages climbing the wall In fact, he climbs over the wall using a snake. And he enters into the house, he knocks the door and window and enters into the house, and the prostitute was so surprised. Oh, you're so much absorbed in me. I wish if you had the same absorption in the Supreme Lord, you could have attained the highest supreme pleasure, supreme peace, supreme bliss. And when Bilu Mangal Thakur heard this, he was stuck. Yes, that's true. What did I obtain all these days coming here? I'm still dissatisfied. I'm still not completely happy. So people in the material world also try to engage again and again in sense gratification, not recognizing that in spite of doing so many sensual activities, I'm dissatisfied. People are doing so much, they're working so hard to earn so much and find happiness in different kinds of sense enjoyment, but none of the sense enjoyment has ever given me satisfaction, true happiness. Therefore, one must inquire that what is the meaning of engaging in such sense gratification? So an intelligent man will recognize there is no value, there is no greater value in undergoing sense gratification. And therefore, it is being said here that one must subdue one's senses. Subduing one's senses means to recognize that sense gratification is futile. So does it mean that the senses should not be used? No, it does not mean that senses should not be used. Whenever there is senses, there is a need for sense enjoyment, but it is restricted. It is to be done in a regulated manner, in a manner which benefits our spiritual progress. And therefore, the spiritual masters gives activities so that we can engage our senses and not misuse our senses. So it is said here that sense gratification is the cause of our bondage in this material world. So as long as one desires for sense gratification, one needs to take birth in the material world. And therefore, one is, as much as one wants to, just like an animal chasing a mirage, is never satisfied. Similarly, a person who is going after sense gratification again and again and again is never satisfied. And he's never satisfied and is also bound to this material world, because of which he is struggling again and again. And therefore, a person who is engaged in sense gratification, just like a thirsty animal which never fulfills his thirst, similarly, a man cannot find complete satisfaction or complete peace when he's too much indulged in sense gratification. And therefore, another important principle to note is that the best way to subdue one's senses is to follow the instructions of a bona fide spiritual master. The bona fide spiritual masters gives a certain program which helps one to control one's senses. So in short, the simple formula that is mentioned in this verse to find ultimate peace is that one should control one's senses while absorbed in transcendental knowledge. And one must have rightful faith. And rightful faith means neither blind faith nor blind arrogant questioning. It is faith in a true bona fide spiritual master, to identify him, to surrender unto him, to serve him, and to ask questions in a mood to understand. If one performs these three things, develop faith in Guru and Krishna, absorb in transcendental knowledge, and subdue one's senses by following the instructions given by the spiritual master, then one will not be affected by illusion. One will not break the laws of nature. And therefore, one will see the external disturbances, one will be free from external disturbances. And one last final point is that even one's disturbance of mind, even if there is some disturbance externally, if one is transcendentally situated, absorbed in transcendental consciousness, if one is absorbed in transcendental knowledge, then one will not feel the pangs of the disturbances. Rather, one will cross over the temporary disturbances that may arise because of a situation in transcendental platform. So this is a simple formula for anyone, not only for individuals, but for the society and for the nation to find true peace. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, I have one question. I have actually two questions. Number one is like how to fully control our senses. The one which you discussed, yeah, that's a very good, valid point. I mean, controlling senses is not that easy. Some or the other, you know, mind is like a running horse. It is going somewhere here, there. So how to control that?
Okay, so I'll answer this question first. So there is another point which was mentioned in purport, which I forgot to mention, and thank you for asking this question. Prabhupada gives an example of lion. So whenever there is a lion, even if there are big elephants, they run away. So whenever lion roars, even big elephants go away. Similarly, Srila Prabhupada says that if one chants this transcendental Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, just like the lion is roaring and the elephants go away, the material contamination which is present in our mind and heart will vanquish. So this is the fundamental principle. And on top of this, it is important, Srila Prabhupada has given various instructions and he has established various centers where we can positively engage our senses. So rendering devotional service in the temple, keeping ourselves positively busy. So you can go on book distribution, you can chant, you can come down to temple and do some seva, or you can find from devotees as how you can practically engage yourself at home in wherever place you are in devotional service. Because until unless one does not engage in spiritual activities, the taste for material enjoyment will not go away. So the only remedy is to engage in positive spiritual activities. Because in positive spiritual activities, the soul finds spiritual bliss, spiritual happiness. And because of that, the living entity feels, what is the enjoyment in the material senses? It is so futile, so insignificant, so low. Why am I hankering for this and struggling, losing such a great treasure of true spiritual happiness? So basically, chanting, following the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, engaging positively in devotional service, along with devotees. Satsang is very important. Sankirtana, we cannot do things alone in Kali Yuga. We should not endeavor to become perfect alone in Kali Yuga. We should always seek association. We should seek devotees association and find out what are the tricks and techniques that you are following, Prabhu, that you are able to do things. How can I be engaged in service together? Collectively, we should do. Collectively, we should be in the association, do seva, then that positive energy will come. That positive desire will come. Then the advancement will increase. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Prabhu. My second question is like, let's say I'm working in IT company, right? And I'm expecting promotion, for example, and I'm not getting that. After not getting my promotion, I will be very agitated, right?
Mhm.
Does it mean that is also not controlling senses? Because I worked hard, even though I didn't get that, which I was deserving. Just a real time scenario, I mean.
That's a good question. So now so one way to think about this is to sincerely make our efforts in whatever we are doing and trust leave to Krishna. So the idea is, so we should do some things importantly, that is, we should keep primary as primary. So the primary goal is that, am I making advancement in spiritual life? Am I getting spiritual satisfaction? So what is happening when I'm not getting promotion? I'm getting dissatisfaction, right? I feel unhappy, right? There are certain emotions that are associated with me getting something materially, not getting something materially. This is called disturbance. Just like the opposite of peace is disturbance. So one factor of disturbance is some gain in material life, some disturbance in material life. This will go on. This will go down. We do not have full control on it because of our past karma and other things. This will always come up and down. But the point here is you absorb yourself in transcendental knowledge. This verse is saying, become faithful that you will attain perfection, not by your promotion. Your perfection of life is not by promotion. You absorb yourself in transcendental knowledge and put your best efforts. If you put your absorption in transcendental knowledge, then you will not find dissatisfaction in the heart, unhappiness in the heart. When you're not dissatisfied and unhappy, you can perform better. Right? At the same time, we should also consider which places are good to work. If possible, we should choose a place which is relatively maybe more fair, more appropriate, more conducive for our devotional service. At the same time, minimal in circumstantial disturbances. So we should also see if there are ways and means we can reduce environments which are not so favorable and be placed in such circumstances which can be more favorable for devotional service. In any case, the fundamental principle is absorb in chanting and reading transcendental knowledge. Let Bhagavatam be heard again and again. Let chanting go again and again. If that is going on, the soul will find peace, and rest things what comes and goes will not be so much troubled. Does that help?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thanks, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Stuti, for joining. How are you? Anyone else? Any other questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
So I don't have any question, but what I understood that to control the mind and senses, we have to engage it into the transcendental activities. This is the only way. Otherwise, it is impossible to control.
Yes, exactly. So we should think how to serve the Lord under the guidance of the spiritual master. How to positively serve. Serve not just physically, the intellect and mind also needs to be engaged in the service. Simply doing some physical activities or only when I go to temple is not the idea. Is to see every activity as an offering to the Lord. Is to see how I can contribute. That desire, when it develops, the Lord gives an opportunity to render service. And especially Sankirtana, in the association of devotees, together, one should, there is unlimited, Krishna is unlimited and his service is unlimited. So as soon as one becomes eager and comes and says, Hare Krishna Prabhu, is there some way I can contribute? Is there some way I can do some seva? Then Lord, spiritual master, through devotees, they will engage in multiple services. And that way we can easily overcome the negative impulses that are present in our heart. There's so many urges which are present in our heart, in Chittam, in our consciousness. But when that is positively engaged, we can overcome those negative tendencies that we have. And that is the way forward. And chanting is the most critical most important, and at the same time, engaging other time in service is the way forward. Harish Prabhu, did you raise your hand sometime back?
Sorry, Prabhu, that was by mistake.
Okay. Okay, if there are no questions or comments, I would request everyone to come in front of camera and chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra once. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki, Granthara Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki, Jai Gaur Prabhupada. Hare Krishna,
Hari Hari Bol.
Ishika. Hare Krishna, Abhiram, how are you?
Good.
Good, very nice. Ishika, where are you? Are you in sky? I see sky behind you.
It's a background.
Oh, it's a background. Oh, it's like very deceptive.
Yeah.
Bhargav Prabhu also has got a background. Okay.
Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you for joining. Okay.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Shika.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Stuti, are you there?